In the dark Arctic winter of 1847, trapped in the middle of the ice, two ships carried Britain's most disciplined sailors silently toward death. These men were not shouting. They were not trying to escape in panic. Logs were still being written. Watch schedules were still being maintained because none of them knew that what they were experiencing would become a collective disappearance that would pass into history. They still believed this was only a temporary hardship. This story is known as the Franklin Expedition, one of the greatest exploration attempts of the 19th century, and at the same time, one of the heaviest prices ever paid for humanity's excessive confidence in nature. In 1845, the British Empire was the most powerful naval force in the world. Most of the world's maps had already been drawn. Oceans had been crossed. Continents had been connected. But there was still one place left in darkness, the Arctic, a sea route linking the Atlantic and the Pacific through the northern ice, the Northwest Passage. If this passage could be found, Britain would become unrivaled in global trade. The man chosen for this mission was an experienced naval officer, Sir John Franklin. He had previously served in the Arctic and was believed to be capable of enduring extreme cold and harsh conditions. Franklin was a reassuring figure, both within the Navy and in the eyes of the public. This expedition was meant to be the peak of his career. Franklin was given two ships, HMS Erebus and HMS Terra. These were no ordinary vessels. Their hulls were reinforced to withstand pressure from the ice. They were equipped with steam-assisted engines. They carried enough provisions to last 3 years. Canned food was the newest technology of the era and was considered safe. Under Franklin's command were 129 men, officers, sailors, engineers, surgeons, all carefully selected. On paper, this expedition could not fail. In the summer of 1845, the ships departed from England. Off the coast of Greenland, they encountered European whalers for the last time. That meeting became the final eyewitness account of the Franklin expedition. After that, the ships sailed north and disappeared into history. At first, no one was concerned. Silence was normal for Arctic expeditions. Months, even years without news were considered ordinary. But as time passed, the silence grew heavier. 2 years, 3 years, no messages. Eventually, Britain was forced to accept the truth: Franklin was missing. Search expeditions were launched. The Navy entered the Arctic repeatedly. Shipwrecks were sought among the ice. Coastlines were searched. But what was found was not hope. It was disturbing questions. In the 1850s, Inuit communities began speaking of white men, emaciated figures walking across the ice, sailors with torn clothing, men wandering without direction. At first, these accounts were dismissed, but over time, discovered bones, personal belongings, and campsite remains confirmed their words. In 1859, a note was found inside a stone cairn on King William Island. It was the only official document left from the Franklin expedition. What it revealed exposed the true scale of the disaster. The ships had been trapped in the ice since 1846. Sir John Franklin had died in 1847. The crew had abandoned the ships in 1848. Even aboard the most advanced ships of their time, Franklin's men had been unable to escape the ice for 2 full winters. Abandoning the ships was not salvation. On the contrary, it was the beginning of the end. The discovered skeletons showed that death had not come from cold alone. Long bones had been deliberately broken. There were cut marks. Archaeologists are clear on this matter. Cannibalism occurred. This is not rumor. It is a fact supported by physical evidence. One of the reasons was that the provisions were not as safe as believed. The canned food had been produced hastily and sealed with lead solder. This caused lead poisoning among the crew, hallucinations, impaired decision-making, physical collapse. These men were not only starving, they were mentally deteriorating as well. After Sir John Franklin's death, the chain of command weakened. In the Arctic, discipline is the foundation of survival. When discipline collapses, technology becomes useless. The men decided to march south through a region with inadequate maps. Distances were miscalculated. The cold made every step more deadly. Years later, modern research confirmed the locations of HMS Erebus and HMS Terror. The ships lay beneath the Arctic like silent tombs. Inside were still plates, bottles, and personal belongings. Everything looked as if the crew might return at any moment. But no one ever did. The Franklin expedition is not merely a disappearance. It is a harsh blow to the 19th century idea of progress. It is proof of how fragile humanity's faith in technology becomes when confronted by nature. These men were not ignorant. They were not weak. They were not unprepared. But the Arctic does not forgive mistakes. Franklin's crew consisted of 129 men. Each had a family. Each had a past. And none of them knew, when they left home, that they would vanish into the ice. If the Franklin expedition is still told today, it is not because of mystery. It is because humanity remains capable of repeating the same mistake again and again, and the Arctic never forgets. Time moves differently in the Arctic. Days blur together, nights stretch endlessly, weeks feel like months. For Franklin's men, the first winter felt like a survivable trial. The ships were strong. There were supplies. The officers maintained order. Everything still reflected the discipline of the British Navy. The men still believed they were facing a difficult mission, not a catastrophe. But the Arctic works patiently. When the second winter began, everything changed. The sun disappeared for months. The cold was felt not only outside, but inside the ships as well. The steam engines were almost completely useless. Coal supplies were running out. The ice tightened its grip on the hulls. The ships were no longer merely trapped. They were being crushed. The men's bodies weakened, but the real collapse began in their minds. The lead-soldered cans slowly released poison. At first, no one noticed. Lead poisoning progresses silently. Headaches began. Irritability increased. Confusion grew. Even simple decisions became difficult. Officers gave orders, but the orders were no longer carried out with the same clarity. Discipline still existed, but it was hollow. Toward the end of the second winter, diseases spread. Scurvy rotted their bodies. Gums bled. Wounds would not heal. Men struggled to walk. When cold, hunger, and disease combine, the body cannot resist. But the greatest danger is the loss of hope. Sir John Franklin did not live to see this stage. He died in 1847. The exact cause of his death is unknown, but his death sealed the fate of the expedition. Because Franklin was not just a commander, he was the symbol of order. When he died, the top link of the chain broke. Command passed to other officers. But in the Arctic, rank exists only on paper. True leadership is the ability to convince people that survival is still possible. And no one truly believed that anymore. When the third winter arrived, the ships still had not moved. The ice had not melted. Supplies had reached critical levels. The men now knew one thing with certainty. they would not escape this place with these ships. At that moment, one of the heaviest decisions in history was made. The ships would be abandoned. It appeared to be a plan for survival, but in reality, it meant walking toward death. Because in the Arctic, stepping onto land is not safer than staying at sea. Maps were inadequate, distances were misjudged, rivers were frozen, the wind cut into faces like a blade. When the men left the ships, they took everything they could carry. Some even carried unnecessary items, cutlery, books, metal objects. This seems irrational, but it reveals the collapse of the human mind. People want to believe that order still exists. The march began. Officers walked at the front. The weakest followed behind. Among them were the sick, the half-blind, those barely able to walk. Some fell within days. Some never stood up again. The cold does not wait. Those who fall behind remain behind. Inuit testimonies describe this period. White men walking across the ice. Figures emaciated by hunger, eyes staring into emptiness. Some carried bones in their hands. Some had blood around their mouths. These accounts matched the bones found years later. The bones, they were broken. Long bones, especially, had been deliberately shattered. This is no coincidence. It is done to reach the marrow. Archaeologists are clear. Cannibalism occurred. This is not a crime story. It is a survival reflex. When faced with death, humans may cross their final line, but even cannibalism did not bring salvation. At some point, the march stopped. People collapsed where they stood or attempted to turn back. No one knew exactly where they were going. Maps were useless. The cold erased everything. Footprints vanished. Bodies disappeared. And here, the Franklin expedition completely disintegrated. Every skeleton found years later is a silent witness to this collapse. Every bone tells the story of a wrong decision. Every object is the remainder of a life that set out with hope. The discovery of the ships in 2014 and 2016 completed the story. HMS Erebus and HMS Terra lay silently beneath the Arctic. Plates were still there, bottles remained. Personal belongings were untouched. Time seemed frozen inside the ships. But the people were gone. The Franklin expedition is not only the story of 129 lost men. It is the story of humanity's blind faith in technology. It is the story of how meaningless the words, "we are prepared," become in the face of nature. These men were not foolish. They were not cowards. They were not weak. But the Arctic does not care. If the Franklin expedition is still remembered today, it is not because of mystery. It is because humanity still does not fully understand its own limits, and because every generation is capable of repeating the same mistake with new tools. The Arctic is still there, silent, cold, and remembering everything. Thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. See you again on our next journey.